They didn't just lose a friend. They lost a covering. And now, the silence you left behind is preaching louder than any voice they ever praised. They called you replaceable while drinking from the peace you carried. They mocked your stillness, not knowing it was a shield. And when you walked away, they thought you were retreating. But heaven was repositioning its vessel. There are people right now sitting in dim rooms, not realizing the light went out the moment you left. The conversations feel forced. The air feels heavy. Opportunities that once flowed effortlessly now feel sealed shut. It wasn't a season shift, it was a spiritual removal. Because when a chosen one departs, the atmosphere remembers. It grieves, it convicts, and it echoes. This is Echoes of the Chosen, where what the world silenced, heaven now reveals. Where the rejected rise and the misunderstood are finally unsealed. Jesus said in Luke 10:16, "Whoever rejects you, rejects me." And they didn't just reject you, chosen one. They rejected the divine force moving through you, the intercession, the protection, the alignment. They dismissed the answer because it didn't come wrapped in applause. But now the drought is speaking, the emptiness is preaching. And what they once called too sensitive is the very discernment they're now desperate to find. Stay until the end, because what's about to be unsealed in this message may explain why you were misunderstood your whole life, why you were fought in silence, why your absence hits harder than your presence ever did. You were never just there. You were sent. And now heaven is pulling back the veil, so you can finally see what they could not. Divine disruption. The blessing they couldn't recognize. You were not just a kind presence. You were a sent solution, clothed in simplicity. While others brought noise, you carried alignment. Your footsteps were not random. They were ordered. Like Joseph sent into Egypt, not as decoration, but preservation. They didn't see it, because heaven rarely wraps its answers in what the world applauds. You walked in with peace, and they called you soft. You stayed silent in chaos, and they called you passive. You prayed in secret, and they assumed you were absent. But now that you've left, the cracks are forming. The atmosphere has shifted. The covering is gone, because what they mishandled was never just a person. It was a divine placement. You were the shield they mocked, the bridge they burned, the intercessor they ignored while feeding from your obedience. You weren't needed because you were convenient. You were necessary because you were sent. The weight of your presence is only now being measured by the collapse that followed your exit. And heaven is allowing the void to preach the sermon they refused to hear, veiled and valuable. The pain of being hidden. You prayed for impact, but God gave you invisibility. You asked for clarity, but He handed you silence. Not because you weren't ready, but because the environment wasn't worthy. Like David tending sheep while carrying kingship, you were anointed in obscurity. And still, you stayed faithful. You showed up while being overlooked. You gave without being thanked. You carried burdens for others who never thought to ask how you were doing. But hiddenness is not rejection. It is preservation. Heaven hides its treasures from casual eyes, because oil that is exposed too soon is oil that spoils. They treated your stillness as stagnation, but you were rooted, not stuck. You were growing beneath the surface. And now, the ones who ignored your fruit are tasting famine. The silence wasn't absence. It was divine surveillance. You were never invisible to God. You were veiled for such a time as this. The forge of fire. How the pain carved purpose. There's a kind of pain that doesn't break you. It burns you clean. It's the furnace Elijah knew, the cave David cried in, the prison Joseph survived, and the cross Christ embraced. You wept in rooms no one knew you entered. You warred in the spirit while others laughed. You walked through betrayal with grace because you knew. God doesn't forge warriors in the spotlight. He forges them in the fire. The very people who wounded you were unknowingly sharpening your edge. Every no was carving precision. Every closed door was a redirection away from counterfeit peace. You weren't falling apart. You were falling into place. God was removing what couldn't walk with your anointing. The tears weren't setbacks. They were soft baptisms into divine strength. You weren't broken. You were baptized in fire. And now your scars speak louder than applause ever could. The weight of their mistake. When honor is withheld. Heaven watches how people treat what it sends. Not everyone who receives a blessing knows how to honor it. And when dishonor becomes culture, removal becomes mercy. They didn't just reject you, they rejected the grace assigned to you. They laughed at your discernment. They mocked your silence. They dismissed your prayers as too deep. But the moment they dishonored what covered them, the flow began to dry. It wasn't punishment, it was principle. The same way Elisha watched Elijah ascend, and the mantle fell. So too does dishonor cause mantles to lift, blessings to reroot, peace to withdraw. You didn't curse them, but the blessing lifted itself. Not out of spite, but because heaven doesn't stay where it isn't valued. Dishonor doesn't make the blessing disappear, it makes it inaccessible. And now they sit in rooms filled with tension, realizing too late that the presence they treated casually was the portal they were praying for. Unseen authority. The power you carried quietly. You never needed a title to walk in authority, because heaven doesn't authorize you publicly until it has tested you privately. You were the thermostat in the room, while they thought you were just part of the furniture. You didn't speak often, but when you did, realms shifted. Your discernment cut through confusion. Your peace settled storms before they formed. Like Esther before the throne, you were clothed in stillness but crowned in fire. The authority on your life wasn't loud, it was legislative. You decreed without announcing. You prayed without performance. You stood without spectacle. They thought you were quiet, but heaven knew you were royal. You weren't overlooked. You were undercover. And now, the spiritual realm is responding to the authority they never saw coming. Divine assignment. Heaven didn't just send you. It positioned you. God does not send chosen ones randomly. He plants them with precision. Every room you entered, every season you endured, every soul you covered. There was a reason. You weren't sent to impress. You were sent to intercept, to interrupt cycles, to anchor atmospheres. You were the unannounced answer to prayers they couldn't even articulate. Like Moses before Pharaoh, you didn't show up with charisma. You showed up with command. And when your assignment was complete, God pulled you out. Not because you failed, but because your mission reached its seal. You weren't removed. You were released. And now, heaven is preparing the next territory. One that will recognize what the last one rejected. The remnant is rising. You were never alone. You thought you were the only one, walking through fire, wrestling in silence, fighting invisible battles that left visible scars. But there are others, across nations, across timelines, marked by heaven, misunderstood by earth. You are not an anomaly. You are a signal, one echo among many, resounding in this hour. And the more the world mocks what is sacred, the louder the remnant grows. We are not influencers. We are intercessors. We are not chasing platforms. We are stewarding portals. You weren't isolated. You were identified. And now the remnant is rising. And you are not late. You are right on time. Echo activation. What you carry is not just for you. The pain wasn't just personal, it was prophetic. The rejection wasn't just emotional, it was instructional. Every moment of silence, every hidden battle, was forming a voice meant to echo through generations. You were never meant to hold your light quietly. You were meant to transmit, to speak what others were too afraid to say, to unseal scrolls through presence alone. God did not preserve you so you could remain silent. He preserved you because your sound is necessary for what comes next. You are not just a voice. You are a reverberation of heaven's heart in human form. You weren't just sent with a word. You are the word in motion. And now, the echo begins. Not just through what you say, but through who you've become. There's one truth that ties every moment together. You were not forgotten. You were hidden. Not hidden to be ignored. Hidden to be preserved. Heaven does not waste vessels. It conceals what carries weight. What they called ordinary was actually ordained. What they mishandled was sacred. And what they dismissed will now be the very thing God uses to confront their drought. Chosen one, you have endured the silence, passed through the fire, and stood still while being broken open. But you were not being punished. You were being prepared. And now, everything that tried to bury you will witness the unveiling of what heaven never stopped building in secret. You have been marked. You have been forged. And now, you are being sent. If this word echoed something deep in your spirit, comment 777 as your prophetic seal, your spiritual yes. Tell us what part pierced you, what revelation awakened you. Let your voice become part of the scroll being written in this generation. Subscribe and stay connected to Echoes of the Chosen, because the remnant is rising. And this is only the beginning. You are not alone. You are the next echo.